Redshift here, doing my part to shift perceptions out of the pink and into the red. Okay, so I've gotten a few comments by one of my subscribers. I'm not going to name him because I don't want to embarrass him, because this video is not about criticizing him or anything. And it's probably a good question that he asked, which is that, can you comment on modern monetary theory, MMT? And so I'm going to be very harshly criticizing MMT, but this should not be construed as a criticism of him, because it's not. But I just wanted to rant about MMT and how ridiculous it is. So this is not going to be a scripted video. What I did was, I don't know, a few weeks ago or whenever, when he first asked the question, I watched a 5-minute video about it, a primer video that I found on YouTube about it. But then I kind of felt like, I did a whole big long voice recorder rant about it in response to that 5-minute video, step by step, all the little things he said. I was debunking those or whatever. And then recently I thought, I really should do more research than just a 5-minute primer video. So I watched like 24 minutes or so of a 48-minute video, so about exactly half of a video. It was a Bloomberg interview with this chick with short hair. I think it was black hair. She was interviewing this guy. There are two guys, actually. I think one was more the main guy who was answering. The other guy was kind of just sort of like an assistant of his, maybe clarifies some things or whatever, or asked a clarifying question or whatever. But, the two guys are sort of like the MMT advocates, and she was a lady from Bloomberg who was asking him questions, and the main guy, he said a bunch of stuff, and it was all pretty retarded. Just like the 5-minute video that was the primer of MMT was pretty retarded. Although, I'm not criticizing the guy who did the primer video, because he doesn't seem to necessarily be an advocate of it. He just seemed to be doing a video sort of letting everybody know what MMT is. You know what I mean? So, MMT stands for Modern Monetary Theory, as I said before. And the guy in the longer video said that it says something, it's basically the idea, something along the lines of like, a government puts out its own currency, pays, makes loans or something in its own currency, and pays, has people pay their taxes in that currency, and spends in its own currency. So it prints its own currency, spends its own currency, collects taxes in its own currency, makes out loans in its own currency, gets those loans back in its own currency, etc. So that's basically what it is. And the guy said that, there's this idea that that the so-called expert in modern monetary theory was saying that in the longer video, was saying that modern monetary theory is not the idea that you can just spend endlessly. He says just because you can pay your debts with your dollars doesn't mean that you can just spend as much as you want, because that would cause massive inflation. And he's like, inflation is what limits how much you can spend or whatever under modern monetary theory. He also said that we already have modern monetary theory. China, Japan, England, I think he said England, America, and probably a bunch of other countries, maybe most of the countries in the world, are modern monetary theory countries. He definitely said 3 or 4 examples. I think 4 examples he gave: America, China, Japan, and maybe England, and maybe one other. He said are modern monetary theory countries, right? So it's nothing new in a sense, right? But I guess the theory is new, as in the theory that this is good and sustainable and ideal or something, right? Which is utterly retarded to anybody who knows anything about sound money or, Austrian economics. He also said in the video something really retarded. I can't remember what the context of it was, but he said that, the government can just, the modern monetary theory government can just, institute price controls or rationing or whatever. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, my ears, I was like, oh my God, he did not just say that. What a moron. So this is what modern monetary theory is, advocating these retarded policies that were debunked in the 40s by Henry Hazlitt in his book Economics in One Lesson. And they're probably debunking it way before him. He just did like, a popular, definitive, easy to understand debunking. But like, people before him, probably decades before, were debunking, the idea that price controls or rationing is a good or effective thing. Like, read that book, Economics in One Lesson, and he clearly debunks the minimum wage, which is another thing they seem to be in favor of, or they definitely were not opposed. They seem to definitely, the MMT expert guys definitely did not seem to be opposed to minimum wage. They definitely seemed to think it was an okay thing, if not a preferable thing. It's not like they were like super gung-ho on it, but they seem to be okay with the idea of a minimum wage, which is retarded because minimum wage is a terrible idea, as is proven by Henry Hazlitt in his book, Economics in One Lesson. Everybody needs to read that book. He clearly, easily understandably, and definitively debunks the minimum wage. He also clearly and definitively and easy to understand way, he debunks other things that they mentioned, like price controls and rationing. Like, for example, in price controls in the book, I don't know, I can't remember if this was in the sections of the book that I read in my Economics in One Lesson video, but in one part of the book, he's talking about price controls, and he talks about how if you want to set the price of something like, steak or something, you can't just set the price of that because, it'll sell out. Like, if you sell the price of that, it will sell out. And because you're keeping the level below what it should be, below what the free market naturally wants the price to be. So, the price mechanism is what solves problems, like scarcity problems, lack of efficiency problems, etc. Right? Like, all these problems are solved by the price mechanism. You see, the price goes up when something is too scarce. The price going up means that the thing that is scarce is now more profitable to make. Making it more profitable to make means more people are going to make it. That takes care of the scarcity problem. Also, because more people making it drives the price back down again. And more people making it means they need to compete against each other now. So now they have to find ways to be more creative and more efficient or more productive or, produce more of it at a cheaper price. And they need to find ways to, be more efficient in that way. And doing so means they can produce more of that thing with less money, thus making the whole process of producing that thing more efficient, and thus also meaning that more can be produced that way. So innovations are made in, technology or whatever, and then that spreads to the whole industry. Everybody's using that technology now, and now way more of this stuff is being produced because of those efficiencies, right? Like, if there's not enough wheat in the world, then, they figure out ways to crossbreed wheat so that wheat, has more, more of the edible part of the wheat on each stalk or whatever. You know what I mean? So they can harvest more per acre. So then, more wheat is produced. So then, they do that to get ahead of their competitors. You know what I'm saying? So basically, like, the price mechanism solves all problems. And the price doesn't just go up forever. Like, some people might like accuse the price mechanism, the free market. They may say that like this is all sort of a tangent, but like it's important to disprove like what he was saying about price controls working and or rationing working. Like, he disproves rationing too, I think, in the book Economics in One Lesson. You really should read it. I can't remember what he said about rationing, but I basically remember what he said about price controls, which is that price controls, you have to, not only are you setting the price below what the free market would be, which means like people are going to buy it like crazy, and then instead of keeping it affordable so that everybody can afford it, so everybody can get it, you're still making it, so that everybody can't get it by keeping the price too low, so then everybody buys too much, and that means, but also, he said, if you want to control the price of something, you also, I can't remember exactly why this is, but he explains it in the book, it's easy to understand, Henry Hazlitt does, but you also have to set the price of all the previous steps that led up to that product. Like, if you're going to, set the price of, steak, you got to set the price of the people who, you got to set the price of, live beef, the live animal. You got to set the price of the people who work at those places that raise the live animals. I think you have to set the price of the grain that is fed to the animals. You got to set the prices. You got to price control everything leading up to that one thing that you want to price control. And of course, this means that like you're basically setting the prices for everything. If you want to control the prices of anything in society, you got to set tons of prices, tons of other things. So then you get basically a central economy, centrally planned economy. You know, and everybody knows centrally planned economies don't work. They're inefficient. They're retarded. There's no innovation. There's no profit incentive to innovate or to become more efficient or to work harder or whatever. You know, so it just stifles progress. It stifles production and it stifles progress in terms of like technological innovations and stuff like this, right? So price controls are a terrible, terrible idea. They never work. They create black markets, so they don't work anyway. For that reason, they destroy the profit motive to become more efficient. They destroy the motive to even make that product in the first place, so then fewer people are making the product because you can't make a profit on it because of price controls, etc., etc. So price controls are a terrible idea. Rationing is also a terrible idea. Not because it's inhumane or something, but because it just doesn't work. It's been tried and tried and tried, and it never works. So the fact that these experts in modern monetary theory would be, advocating things that have been debunked 74 years ago by Henry Hazlitt, and which were probably debunked decades before that by other people, like the fact that they would be putting forward these old retarded ideas that have been already disproven is just proof that these people are absolute idiots. Also, they never mentioned the petrodollar in that whole first 24 minutes of that video. Nor was there any mention of the petrodollar in any of in that primer video I saw. And it's just, it makes no sense whatsoever. It really, really makes no sense. Because like he also said in that long video that the idea, he said the whole modern monetary theory idea came about like 25 years ago, right? And surprise, surprise, I knew that stupid theory had to have come about after the creation of the petrodollar. I just knew it. I didn't have any proof, but I knew it. And then once he said that in that video, I was like, oh, yeah, there you go. They're just trying to basically like say that, economies can work the way they are now, as if they couldn't be way, way, way more efficient, as if, Hitler's economic miracle didn't prove that, you can have a way, way, way more prosperous economy, and you can turn an economy around in just a few years, like, 6 years or whatever it was, way less than a decade. Hitler turned the economy in Germany from being the worst economy in the world, the most hellish hyperinflation, etc., to being an economy with the highest standard of living in Europe at the time. In just a few years, it went from the worst country in Europe to the best country in Europe. That is how fast you can turn around a country when you have wise leadership, sound money, etc., etc. When you have discipline, when you have non-corrupt leadership who actually cares about its people and makes the value of the money sound, and etc., etc., when you do that, then it makes it so that you can absolutely, when you do that, you can absolutely turn around a country really, really quickly. So to act like, today's utterly pathetic economic growth, utterly pathetic level of prosperity, that is, we don't have prosperity, really, we have poverty. Like everybody is in a state of relative poverty compared to what they could be and should be living under. You know what I mean? Like way less free time, having to work way longer hours, which is kind of the same thing. A shortage of jobs, it's just absolutely retarded that we have the level of technological development we have, and yet people are living these lives that are way, way worse than they should be. And society was way happier. Everyone had a way higher standard of living back in the 50s. So it's ridiculous to act like things are okay now. So why are things crappy now? I mean, these MMT people don't even seem to admit that things are crappy now. And if they do, they don't seem to be, realizing why things were better way back. It's like government is like this toad that sits in the middle of all the exchange. Like, imagine a bunch of people all in a circle, and all these people sitting in a circle are like, making goods and trading the goods for other things with each other. But yet, like, there's this giant toad that, like, hops into the center of the circle. Like, he's like the toad in that movie, Pan's Labyrinth, right? Like, he's this giant toad, and he's too dangerous and too scary, and so nobody wants to mess with him. And so the toad is like, all right, everybody has to put their transactions through me now. And so everybody has to, like, give their product to the toad, and then he gives it to the person that, they want it to go to. And then that person gives the toad the thing or the money for the thing or whatever that they want to give to the other person in exchange for that thing, right? And then the toad takes his cut of every transaction. And he's not taking 1% or 5%. He's taking like, 10, 20, 30%, a cut, a 20, 30% cut of everything. Everything that goes through him. And all transactions have to go through him. And so he's just sitting there, sucking up the wealth of the country, buying food with it, buying all kinds of stuff for himself, and just eating and eating and eating. And then everybody's way poorer than they are because of him sucking up all the resources. That's what government is. It's a giant toad sitting in between everybody else, sucking up all the resources. And so these MMT people are actually advocating the government be just as big, if not bigger. It's absolutely retarded. He also talked about how, well, in World War II, we had, government spending or something was like 50% of GDP. So, we've done it before, and the Green New Deal would only be 5% of GDP, so we can totally do it. And I'm thinking, are you retarded? Number one, government was way, way, way smaller back then. And so it was stealing from everybody way, way, way less. And so it's a situation that, nobody trusts government these days. Government is utterly corrupt. It illegally surveils us, totally unconstitutionally surveils us. The cops are absolutely stormtroopers. I mean, they look like stormtroopers. The SWAT and all the rest of them. When they break down doors and invade someplace, not even that dangerous of a place. Sometimes they even get it wrong. They break into the wrong house, and then the guy defends himself, and they kill him. When they were at fault, he was defending himself because he's there's no reason they should have been busting into his house, so... he's he just sees he's getting broken into, and then he shoots back. He shoots at him, and then they shoot back and they kill him, right? Because they went to the wrong house. But even aside from that, I mean, they really are stormtroopers, cops are, and they're enforcing tyrannical laws. And government steals massive amounts of everybody's wealth and holds back technological progress. And there's just endless corruption. Hillary with her email scandal, Benghazi, just the endless scandals. The weapons of mass destruction. We got to go into Iraq. And it'll only cost, $100 billion, ends up costing $6 trillion or more. There's a book called the $3 trillion war or the $6 trillion war or something, and that was written way back. The final cost of that war must have been even more. I don't know what it is, but it's got to be maybe it's the $3 trillion war, but now they estimate the war cost, by now about $6 trillion, I think. That might be what I read about. It's just insanely expensive. Nobody trusts government anymore. Government is utterly corrupt. The American government, at least. And other governments pretty much, too. I mean, the European government's completely betraying their people by allowing all this massive immigration. I mean, it's just absolute insanity. I mean, that is literal treason. Their politicians are committing literal treason against the people of those countries. Like Germany and England and all that. These scumbag politicians, nobody trusts them anymore. Not even the tiniest little bit. What's Congress's approval rating? 10, 13%, something like that. Nobody trusts these people. Nobody likes them. They're scumbags, and everybody knows it. You know what I mean? Well, not everybody, but 90% or so of people do. So, we could never have that level of spending again. And even if we could, you don't think the government's going to waste it? I mean, Social Security was supposed to be something that pays for itself, but, no, it didn't end up being that. The government just stole the Social Security money as it came in, wasted it on other stuff, and then they used the incoming money from the next generation to pay out the other generation, that they stole the Social Security money from. You know what I mean? Stole it instead of collecting it and putting it in coffers, saving it and then paying it back out. They didn't do that. They took it in and then they wasted it. And then they expected the next generation's incoming Social Security payments to, pay out, would go right back out to pay the people who are collecting. You know what I mean? And it's just gone on like that. And it's gotten worse and worse. And they've extended the time that you gotta, retire. Eventually they'll just raise, TFM seems to have even advocated for this. Raising, if I remember correctly, raising the, age at which you can retire or whatever until basically it's right before people die. But that's a default. But still people are still paying in. So that's not a solution. MMT is just retarded. It's basically, it relies on trust in government. And it doesn't seem to acknowledge, at least he didn't in the first 24 minutes of the video, he never talked about the debt-based nature of the currency, which the debt, he really didn't just seem to not mention it, but he seemed to really not understand that fact. Because the dollar being debt-based means that the debt has to constantly grow, because every dollar that comes into existence automatically has debt attached to it. And because it has debt attached to it, you got to borrow more dollars into existence to pay back the previous dollars as interest, because there's not enough dollars to pay the interest on the previous dollars. And then those dollars, those new dollars, have interest attached, and then you got to borrow even more dollars into existence to pay back the interest, to pay the interest on those dollars. And it just goes on and on and on like that. It's a Ponzi scheme, and everybody knows Ponzi schemes can't last forever. They're, they go exponential. They're mathematically impossible eventually. There's not enough people on Earth, there's not enough money, whatever. Like the dollar being debt-based means it is literally a Ponzi scheme. It cannot last. It's utterly, utterly impossible for it to last. Even theoretically, it's impossible for it to last. And even more so practically is it impossible to last. It's even more impossible to last when you're talking in practical terms, but even theoretically, it's impossible. There's no way for it even theoretically to last. A debt-based currency. So the debt-based currency is totally insane. And it really is the case that, these MMT advocates don't seem to understand that the dollar is debt-based and that this is a bad thing and it will inevitably lead to a horrific crash, and that we've been on a 100-year course toward the end of debt-based fiat currency as it finally goes parabolic. We've done things to sustain the system, go off the gold standard and go on the petrodollar so we can rob the whole world, in order to keep this debt-based fiat currency thing going. But you can't do it forever. You cannot do it forever. And so it really is the case that, I don't think they understand the petrodollar. I don't think they understand the debt-based nature of the dollar. Even without the petrodollar. Before the petrodollar, the dollar is debt-based. Ever since the creation of the Federal Reserve, the dollar has been debt-based. I don't think they understand the debt-based dollar, and I furthermore think they don't understand the petrodollar. And so these MMT people, they clearly don't understand rationing or price controls. They don't seem to understand what they're talking about at all. These people are absolute morons, these MMT advocates. Now, if you had a non-debt-based dollar, and you didn't have a petrodollar or anything like that, which necessitated war, and therefore makes the whole system, it inspires terrorism, and it becomes, pointless because you're wasting too much money on wars to sustain the petrodollar. You're wasting as much money, or near as much money, on war to sustain the petrodollar as you're getting in financial benefit from the petrodollar. So if you have no petrodollar, you have no debt-based money, you have a fiat currency that the government just prints up and everybody uses, and the government can inflate it or deflate it as it chooses or whatever. That's another thing. But like I was saying, I guess I'll get into that a little later, but if you can, inflate it or deflate it as you choose or whatever, and there's no shunting the inflation off onto the rest of the world through the petrodollar or anything like that. There's no debt-based nature of the dollar, which means the debt always has to grow. So you can actually decrease the debt if the dollar is not debt-based. You don't have to have a sound currency. You can have a fiat currency that is not debt-based. You can absolutely have that, and that's much, much better than a debt-based fiat currency. It seems like the evolution of money has just been becoming more and more evil, more and more unsustainable. We went from sound money to, fiat currency, from fiat currency to debt-based fiat currency, from debt-based fiat currency to, the petrodollar, which is still debt-based, but now it's also shunting our inflation onto the rest of the world. So it's thieving. It's thieving from the whole world, not just its own citizens. So that's even worse. It's just as bad as the debt-based dollar because it's still debt-based, but now you got this added layer of evil layered on top of the debt-based nature of it. So it's even more evil than just simple debt-based fiat currency. So it seems like, money is just getting more and more and more evil. Now, we had a massive change toward the good with Bitcoin and Monero and stuff like that, but, the government, if people don't get their balls back, the government's going to create a cryptocurrency of its own. I think Venezuela or some already created a cryptocurrency of their own called the petrodollar. No, not called the Petro. Yeah, it's backed up supposedly by sour crude in the ground, sour crude oil in the ground. I think it's a bullshit cryptocurrency, but the point is, the governments of the world are going to create their own cryptocurrencies, and they're going to be fiat currency. But worse than fiat currency, and worse than debt-based fiat currency, and worse than petrodollar debt-based fiat currency is a crypto that is like the petrodollar. You know, China will probably create a crypto that's like the petrodollar. Maybe it's debt-based. It's definitely a fiat currency. You know, will be probably. And they'll use that to not just steal from everybody in the whole world, but they will also use it to, you know what everybody is doing, because, you know, the coins will be trackable and everything. So they'll know everything that everybody is spending. Every penny that everybody spends will be able to be looked up by the government, and they'll be able to use algorithms and artificial intelligence to, you know, predict things about what kind of people are going to spend what money where and at what time. Predictive algorithms or whatever. So it's kind of like telling the future, because it uses probability. So they don't know who's going to spend there at that time, but they know someone's going to spend there at that time, and different groups of people. Like, you know, they'll be able to do all kinds of stuff. They'll be able to, you know, there will be no physical cash, so there will be no anonymity of money anymore. You know, you won't be able to hide your assets or anything like that. It'll just be utterly terrible. It'll be even worse. So unless we jump on this crypto bandwagon to make sure it stays working for good, you know, and everybody's using Monero or Bitcoin or whatever, if we allow the governments to take this technology and use it for their own purposes and enslave us with physical force and force us to use their crypto, then we are going to be utterly enslaved more than ever before in all of human history. But I guess that's sort of a little bit going off the topic. What was I going to say? God damn it. Basically, they don't seem to understand that the debt-based nature of the dollar is bad, and means that this whole system is utterly unsustainable. They also don't seem to understand the petrodollar. Oh, what was it? There's a few other things I was going to say regarding this. I got off on a tangent, and I have a terrible memory, so it slipped my mind now what I was just going to say a few minutes ago. But basically, like, MMT is utterly retarded. Like, everything they want to do makes no sense. It totally trusts government, right? Like, that was another thing that he said. He was like, you know, we're going to need federal guidance on this, right? Like, acting... Oh, he also said, like... I mean, there's just so many things that he said that were retarded. This expert on MMT on this video that I watched, the first 24 minutes of the first half of the video, he was saying, like, we're going to need federal guidance. Like, we'll need to study this stuff, right? Like, how we're going to spend money. Like, he was saying, like, and in a sense he was right about how, like, governments actually spend the money first and then they take in taxes, and then he said they destroy the money, and which is actually true from what I've studied of it already, you know, watching Mike Maloney's videos on how the monetary system works. Like, they actually don't want money to enter the system, right? Because they don't want hyperinflation. They don't want too much inflation at all. Kind of like what Jim Rickards was talking about. They want some inflation, but they don't want too much. And they definitely don't want deflation, because deflation can lead to, you know, economic collapse, apocalyptic collapse. I'm not saying that would be a bad thing. I think that would be a good thing, because then everybody suffers horribly, and then everybody realizes, holy shit, having good relationships with people is good and important. You know, having a social safety net, not depending on the government, is good. You know, being responsible and having savings is good. You know, morality is good. Like, people don't realize that stuff unless they suffer. So deflation is good because it makes people suffer. You know, hyperinflation also makes people suffer. So I guess that could probably also be good. But, like, basically, he was, the MMT guy was saying, like, you know, inflation is the limit and stuff. Like, you can spend all this money, but you just, like, you know, you raise taxes or something to, like, make up for it so that the money doesn't enter circulation. Because that's how it is. Like, did you know that when you pay back, like, okay, let's say a credit card company. A credit card company, when you spend money on your credit card, you are literally creating money. Because they are creating that money. All credit card companies are banks. And all banks work the same way these days. Now, this wasn't this way thousands of years ago before debt-based money, but it is this way now. And the way it is now is that you are creating money when you spend money on your credit card, you know? And then when you pay that debt down, you pay back the credit card to the bank, you are destroying that money, right? So that's actually what's happening. Same thing when a bank loans you money. They are creating the money out of thin air. They're expanding the currency supply when a bank loans you money for, like, a house or something, right? And then when you pay it back, the money is being destroyed. You see, this is what is actually happening. It's very weird, but that's how it works. So that's why he was saying that. That MMT guy was saying that, like, the governments actually don't, take in the tax money and then spend it. They actually, spend the money first, then they take in the taxes and they burn it. They destroy it. And he said even in the past with paper dollars, like I think he said in the 1700s or something, I think he used the word colonial America. Not sure when that was. I assume it was the 1700s or something. But he said even back then they would like burn the money, the tax money that came back in. So I don't know if he's right about that, but he's basically right about how the monetary system does like create money, and then when you pay it back, it's destroyed, right? The money is, you're destroying the money, right? So it's actually a deflationary thing, and you are helping bring about the collapse of the debt-based nature of the dollar when you pay down debt. So it's actually a really good thing for people to pay down debt and not take out any new debt, because the system needs more and more and more debt endlessly. So if you're not borrowing money and you're paying down your debts, you're actually waging war on the debt-based nature of the dollar. You're waging war on the financial system by paying down your debts and by refusing to borrow more money. So this is actually a really good thing to do if you want to wage war on the U.S., which you should want to, because our system's all fucked up. So they're right about that, but at the same time, he was saying, like, we could have the government just kind of like spend all this money and like do it in like a smart way or whatever, kind of like, and then people could pay it back in taxes and then like destroy that tax money or whatever, right? So it doesn't enter the system, so we don't have inflation. And I'm thinking, okay, but what you're doing is you're centralizing all the power. You are absolutely centralizing the power and letting the government decide how everything is going to run, what money is being put toward in terms of like, what scientific investments or research is being done. Like all the power goes into the hands of the government when you do things like that, He also talked about like a job program. Like we could have a job program where everybody can get a job. You just go to the government program and you say, hey, I'd like a job. And then they give you a job. Number one, like the government doesn't do anything as good as the free market because the government isn't invested. You know what I mean? The government has nothing to lose. It gets the money for free by threatening people with violence if they don't pay taxes. So people pay taxes, so the government has money. So the government just, and whether it works that way or not, don't fault me for saying that they want tax money or whatever, because tax money makes the whole thing work or whatever. If they weren't taking in taxes, the whole thing wouldn't work. So whether they're spending first and then taking in taxes, or whether they're taking in tax and then spending, in a sense, I think it doesn't really even matter. It's kind of amounts to the same thing, so don't accuse me of hypocrisy on that point. But that's not even really the main point. The main point is, you are putting all the power in the hands of the government when you do, something like MMT or something, right? Have the government spend massive amounts of money and try to make the country better. Now, theoretically, if the government were actually responsible and efficient and moral and wise and long-term thinking, then yeah, maybe MMT could work. But again, that would never work in a democracy because democracies are inefficient. And most dictatorships are bad too because the dictator is a person of low moral character. You know what I'm saying? There are hardly any leaders in history like Ashoka, the famous Buddhist king. He was a hardcore savage. But then he saw the horrific effects of all his wars, and then he instituted Buddhism in his country, and he stopped waging wars and stuff, right? So, there are very, very, very few leaders in history like Ashoka and like Hitler. That is, real leaders with wisdom and integrity and fanaticism and loyalty and hard, willingness to work hard and not be hedonists and all that. Very, very few leaders like that. And even if you do get a leader like that, he dies, and then who replaces him? Probably someone who's not anywhere near as good as him, right? And even if he does replace it himself with someone, names a successor that'll be just as good as him, well, once that chain is broken, the guy dies before he can name a successor or he's assassinated or whatever, how do you get a good leader in again? Because there's hardly any people like that. With that amount of, energy and integrity and honesty and compassion and wisdom and farsightedness and restraint, there's very, very few people that would make a great, great leader. Very, very, very few. Hitler was like 1 in a billion. There have been many, many kings and emperors throughout human history, and yet hardly any of them have been very good. Maybe some of them have been okay, but there's hardly any of them that have been real amazing leaders, like Hitler was. And so theoretically, if you had a dictator who was very wise and he had absolute power and he had great self-discipline, great self-restraint, so he's not going to abuse the power of the government to print money. He's just going to do it for whatever needs to be done and let the free market do the rest. Like, then yeah, maybe MMT could work. But like, that all depends on the moral character and wisdom and discipline of the one dictator, and the dictator having absolute power, so he can do whatever he wants. That way he can make things work. Like Trump doesn't have enough power to make things better. It's like what McAfee said. He said the CIA calls people like the president, and not just this president, but any president, and I think also the congressmen and senators, the people in the CIA call those people transients, because they come and they go. They're not the real power. The real powers in the government are things like CIA and NSA and DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, right? So it's like these intelligence agencies are the real power in the government, right? They are the power behind the power, you know what I mean? The president is quite powerless. I mean, he got in trying to do a wall, supposedly, wanted to do a wall, and then it's how many years later now, and he still has not done the wall? I mean, that just proves how powerless he is. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, we could never ever have MMT work under democracy. He also was like saying like, we need federal guidance on this, right? The MMT guy was saying, right? Like, we need federal guidance on this, as if the government has any kind of wisdom or humanity or anything. I mean, the history of the American government, at least over the last, let's say, 150 years, 170 years, actually, ever since the 1850s when we had the Civil War. But even before that, what led to the Civil War was the unfair taxation. So even before then, it was already getting bad. America was only good for, I don't know, 50 to 70 years maybe? Like, not long at all before it started going bad, And so Jefferson, I think it was, himself, one of the founding fathers, himself said that America's only going to last like 100 years probably before we'll have, the return to tyranny and stuff. And he was basically right, although I'd say it didn't even last that long. Although, I guess that, yeah, it didn't really even last that long. Because, it had been less than 100 years when we had the Civil War. But anyway, like, the government, like the history of America since the Civil War, and even a little before, has been just, increase of tyranny, you know what I mean? Especially since the creation of the Federal Reserve. Then we've really had a huge ramp up in increase in tyranny, and so there's nothing that the government can guide us toward, like the government is like, that's like asking like some drug addicted, violent crack addict murderer on the street living in a cardboard box. That's like asking him for guidance. You know what I mean? Like saying we need federal guidance from the government. It's like saying we need advice from this crack addict who's a murderer and totally addicted to crack and living in a cardboard box. We needed guidance from him. Like, that's how insane it is to act like we need federal guidance. Like, government is nothing but inefficiency, lies, waste, theft and murder. Like, lies, theft, and murder. That's basically the essence of government. Propaganda, taxation, which is theft, and, wars and oppression, through cops and the military, both of which, murder people. That's all government is. It's lies, theft, and murder, and it's really that simple. The American government especially, but all governments, basically. And so to act like we need federal guidance and like the government could, rationally tell us what to do to, wisely spend the money so that we could, advance the economy or whatever, is just retarded. Like, theoretically, if you had a wise leader, like the leader of Germany in the 1930s and stuff, in the 40s, if you had a wise leader like that, then yes, you could use the printing power, the power of the printing press. You could use the power of the printing press to print up dollars and thereby steal purchasing power from everybody's savings, but you'd wisely put it into scientific advancement, scientific research, and developing important things, not just weapons, but like things which are actually going to help society. Like how the government helped create DARPA. DARPA helped create the internet, right? They created the proto thing that was like became the internet. You know what I mean? Like, that was a really good use of money by the government. And if that's all the government spent money on and printed up money to create steal purchasing power so they could use that on these things that like are going to benefit everybody in the country, then yeah, MMT could be a good thing, right? But like, that assumes the government's not going to get corrupted by its power. It assumes the government's going to be efficient. It assumes the government's benevolent. It assumes the government's going to turn that, technology over to the private private enterprise or whatever, to the public so the public can use it and innovate it and build on it rather than keeping it for itself so that it can have power over the public, which the government does. This assumes all these things that are not true. The government is not benevolent. The government is not, morally, sterling. The government is corrupt. The government is not uncorrupt. The government is very corrupt. The government is wasteful. The government hogs the technology so it can more effectively, enslave the people. Like, none of the stuff that MMT assumes about the government that would enable it to use the power of the printing press for good, none of those assumptions are correct. And so it's utterly insane to act like we can, use the power of the printing press for good and make the world a better place and make our country good and functional and everything by just using the power of the printing press. I mean, it's absolute insanity, These people are just so incredibly naive. I mean, they're worse than communists in terms of their naivete and all the rest of it. I mean, communism was, in theory, a good idea, right? Like, this is basically kind of almost, in a sense, kind of like communism, right? Give all the power to the government, have the government use the power for good, the power of the printing press for good and all that. Plus, look at what the government does. Look at Common Core, the educational thing, that new way of doing education called Common Core, right? Well, what did they do? They hired all these experts, these education experts, and they're like, okay, do a determination of how we should do this thing or what guidelines we need to go by or whatever, and then give us your recommendation, right? So all the experts that they chose or whatever, they studied the whole thing and they're like, okay, this is what we should do for Common Core. This is how we should do it, right? And then the government looks at the recommendations, is like, okay, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to do whatever the hell we want. So the government, yeah, it gets experts to study the problem, and then the experts give recommendations, and then the government just throws the recommendations out the window and does whatever the hell it wants and doesn't follow the recommendations at all. Doesn't follow the recommendations at all. So what is the point of trusting government to follow the experts and government hiring experts when the government's not going to listen to the experts? You know what I'm saying? That's what government does. So trusting government to, wisely use the power of the printing press and do it for good and all the rest of it is just so stupid and naive, it's ridiculous. It's just, MMT is absolute nonsense, absolute insanity. These people are ignorant. These people are, spouting fallacies and retarded bullshit that was disproved in the 1940s. They seem ignorant about the debt-based nature of the dollar, and if not that, then they're definitely, it seems, ignorant about the petrodollar, because they don't seem to mention it. And even if they're not, they don't seem to, take it into account properly. They definitely don't seem to understand the government is corrupt, and that America was a successful country because it was founded on the principle that government is corrupt and evil and can't be trusted, and so we're going to give the people tons and tons of rights that cannot be taken away in a constitution, in a Bill of Rights, so that the government can never get out of control powerful. That was what America was about. America was founded on distrust of government. And so these MMT people are completely ignorant in many, many ways, and they actually, trust government, which is another whole level of huge ignorance. You know what I mean? So it's and this is really probably just part of what I could say about MMT and how stupid it is. But you really need to read Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. You need to study the petrodollar. You need to watch Mike Maloney's videos in the Hidden Series of Money videos. He's got a bunch of videos on his channel. It's channel's now called Gold Silver with Mike Maloney. I think it's Gold/Silver with Mike Maloney. So just look up Mike Maloney, Maloney, I think is how you spell his last name. Mike Maloney, and type in Hidden Secrets of Money. Yeah, type in Mike Maloney, Hidden Secrets of Money, and then watch all the videos in that series. I think there's 8 to 10 videos in that series now. There might be a few more, but they're, I think, available only to his gold and silver buyers, because he sells gold and silver also. So yeah, he has a really great series and just start at episode 1 and watch all the episodes. He starts right at the very beginning about how money was created thousands of years ago, what it was used for, how it worked, how the debasement worked. They started adding copper to the gold and silver coins until eventually there was almost no gold or silver left in the copper coins, and then that was the hyperinflation and the collapse of that, nation or whatever. And then, they'd go to another country, or that country would be overthrown or whatever, and then they'd go back to gold and silver. That would last for a while, and then the king, being corrupt, would debase the currency by adding copper until the process happened all over again, which is something we do now with paper money and now with digital money. So he discusses the whole thing. Episode 4 is especially good. It talks about the Federal Reserve and exactly how it works. It's a really crazy process, but even if you don't fully understand it, you can wrap your head around at least a fair amount of it and understand why it's a bad thing, why the Federal Reserve is a bad thing. So you got to read Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. You got to watch the Hidden Secrets of Money series of videos. You really should watch all of Belang P's videos, although this isn't necessarily directly related or whatever. That's also another thing. Like they don't seem to believe in the free market. That's another problem with MMT people. They seem, at least that guy, and who's an expert on it apparently, he doesn't seem to believe in the free market. From the way he's talking, it sounds like he thinks that everything would be better done by the government. Like, as if we had zero free market at all, that would be best or something. That seems to be, like, kind of his attitude. And that's a terrible, terrible attitude, because the reason centralized economies don't work is because the free market and everybody's wants and needs and the price going up and down of things, and like it incentivizing more production and more efficiency, which then drives down the price again, even though now you have more production, so everybody's standard of living gets higher. Like this whole mechanism, the free market and how it works, and with prices going up and down, and investing capital and all this stuff, like all this whole process is super, super, super complicated because there's millions and millions of people involved in it. You know, every time you spend $1 or save $1, you're taking part in that process. You know what I'm saying? So, like, there is no way to make that process better. Maybe an artificial intelligence with, super, super high IQ, tens of thousands of IQ points. Just an absolute genius, godlike AI could maybe improve on the free market. But, like, no human being, no matter how wise and disciplined and everything, could ever improve on the free market. So even if you had MMT working, even then it probably would not be anywhere near as good as the free market. The free market is always best, hence why anarcho-capitalism is good and MMT is bad. MMT is absolute retardation. It's just a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. They don't seem to understand the value of the free market, nor do they seem to understand the importance of seed corn. That is, savings, right? Like, the printing press steals purchasing power from everybody's savings. You see, and when you steal purchasing power from everybody's savings by devaluing their savings, by printing up money, in other words, inflating the currency, in other words, counterfeiting the currency. When you do that, this means people have less money to save. They have less money saved, even though they have the same amount of dollars saved. It has less purchasing power, so they have less ability to start their own business or whatever, you know what I mean? And when you have less ability to start your own business and stuff like that, there's less entrepreneurialism. When there's less entrepreneurialism, you have less innovation, less jobs created, etc., etc. But when you have the government creating jobs, it's like what Henry Hazlitt said. Henry Hazlitt said, like when the government creates jobs, it's a situation of like, they're trying to create full employment. So even, it's a bad thing, but like the government views it as a good thing when people work less efficiently. Because when people work less efficiently, it's a situation of like they're employed for longer. So the government's like, well, they have a job and now they're employed. So like, never mind, they're doing something at half the speed that it could be done at, and they're wasting a ton of money thereby. Well, they're employed, so that's a good thing, right? Yeah, just because people are employed doesn't make it a good thing, What actually raises standard of living is technological advancement and greater productivity. You see, being able to make more, and being able to make more for cheaper, and especially being able to make more, like, per person. You know what I mean? Because, like, if we're making twice as much food on Earth, but we have twice as high of a population as we did before, well, then there's really still just the same amount of food on Earth per person, right? So that doesn't really raise standard of living. But, like, if you limited population growth, like, if everybody got wise enough, like, we genetically engineered everybody to have high IQs, so everybody having high IQs is not interested in breeding like crazy, they realize that everybody's going to have a higher standard of living when they don't breed much, when they only have, like, 2 kids each, and we keep the population of the world at a certain level, or at least the population of a certain country, our country, at a certain level, and we don't allow any immigration or anything, and everybody's just breeding at replacement levels, and a few people are breeding at less than replacement levels, a few people are breeding at more than replacement levels, but everybody has a genetically engineered IQ, to everybody's genetically engineered, so everybody has like a 200 IQ or at least a 160 IQ or something. So everybody knows that, like, you know, everybody's standard of living is going to go down if everybody breeds at more than replacement levels. So everybody just breeds at replacement levels. Well, then technology continues advancing. We can produce more and more and more and more food, but there's not more and more people, at least not in our country, right? So then this means that there's more and more food per person. So then food becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper until it's just super, super, super cheap. Same thing with housing, right? Like, we figure out cheaper and cheaper ways to build bigger and bigger buildings so that, you know, the price of housing gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And it stays getting cheaper because the population is not increasing. See, if you doubled the amount of houses in the country, but you doubled the population, rent and houses and everything's going to cost the same amount. But if you keep the population stable and you double the amount of housing, well, then rent and the cost of a house and everything is going to go down by 50%. And if you quadruple the price, if you quadruple the amount of houses or apartments or whatever, then the price of rent or a house or whatever is all going to go down by 75%. You're down to a quarter of what it was before. So, you know, that's how you increase standard of living. You increase production, you advance technology, and you limit population growth. That is how you increase standard of living. And so, you know, the MMT advocates also don't seem to realize this. They don't seem to realize that, you know, any government jobs, any jobs that are given by government are going to be highly inefficient. This is the history of government. This is not just theory. This is how governments have worked. Just like when I say that price controls and rationing don't work, I'm not just saying it because Henry Hazlitt explained it and it theoretically doesn't work. I'm saying he explained it and explained why it doesn't work because it had already been tried many, many, many times in various places and it had never, ever worked. It always had the same effect. It creates a black market. You create shortages of the very products they're trying to make so that they don't create shortages so everybody can get some. And then, you know, it's just disastrous. It never, like, what government usually does almost always has the exact opposite effect of what they want it to. It's absolutely crazy, but that's the way it goes. And you know, what else can you expect from force, right? And is this not also a very good reason to have anarcho-capitalism? Because even under anarcho-capitalism, you don't have to force women to do anything. You can give them absolute freedom, and the very fact that they will have to defend themselves, to look out for themselves, they'll lose their beauty, and then they'll be forced to work for the rest of their life. All these natural dynamics will make it so that women will want to marry, will want to stay with their husband, etc. You know, because there will be no welfare, because there will be, you know, a culture of morality, and therefore few people will tolerate divorce unless there was infidelity or something, and in which case the person who is unfaithful will be a pariah. You know what I mean? Like, women would naturally stay with their husbands. There would naturally be monogamy under anarcho-capitalism. There would naturally, at least in most places, at least in places with intelligent races, you know, like, there would naturally be, you know, women staying with their husbands for their whole life, even if they're sick of him. You know what I mean? Like, all that stuff would just happen naturally because it's to everybody's advantage, because the natural dynamic makes it work that way. You know, it's to women's advantage to settle down with a guy and stay with him for life, because once she loses her looks, it's too late. She can't get a guy again. You know what I mean? And it's to everybody's advantage for men to be monogamous, because if they don't, if they're being promiscuous, other men will kill them because of being turned into incels by that promiscuity. You see, so under anarcho-capitalism, everything fixes itself. You see, and so really, you don't have to force anybody to do anything. And when you do force people to do things, you know, there is a backlash. Like, I'm not saying women are enslaved, but, like, you know, you can kind of a little bit understand where women are coming from, acting like, you know, women are oppressed throughout all of human history. Because in a sense, men, to make the human race survive, did sort of a little bit oppress women. Rationally and for their own good, but still, it was, you know, a little bit oppression, right? Like, it wasn't consensual per se, at least not entirely. But, you know, in the future, if we have anarcho-capitalism, men just have to form their own no-go zone that has zero laws, and women will volunteer to join and will volunteer to give up all their rights in order to join such a commune. And any women born in that commune can be given the choice. Hey, you can adhere, you know, you can, just do what, you know, is expected. That is, you know, either work and support yourself and don't marry, or, you know, marry and submit to your husband's will and all that, or you can leave the commune if you don't want to, you know, if you want to claim oppression or whatever. But just the very fact that they have absolute freedom, you know, absolute freedom is terrifying to women, and so, you know, they're gonna volunteer to, you know, give up all their rights in order to be taken care of, protected, given children, stayed with, you know, etc. Plus, you know, they don't save money very well. Women don't. You know, that's the data. The data proves they don't save money nearly as well as men do, which is why men are called husbands, because they husband resources, as MGTOW Values has said, right? That's the meaning of the word husband, right? Like a protector of resources, conserver of resources, right? So, you know, you just give women absolute freedom, they'll be terrified and they'll voluntarily choose to, you know, submit themselves to men and stuff. And that's better than forcing them, re-enslaving them under, you know, like a fascist government that's totally fair and patriarchal and stuff. You know, it's much better to have anarcho-capitalism, because then women are voluntarily choosing freedom. And a few won't. A few will choose to work or whatever, and that's fine, because it'll only be a tiny percentage of women choosing that. You know what I mean? But anyway, I guess that's slightly off topic, but basically, I'm saying, like, you know, when you force anything, it turns out badly. When you allow people to do what they want, then it turns out much better. So, you know, the government forcing price controls or rationing or anything else always turns out badly. It always has the exact opposite effect of what you want. So if you want things to turn out well, you just have to give everybody absolute freedom. And MMT is the exact opposite of freedom. It's big government. It's therefore inefficiency. It's therefore, you know, violence and coercion and censorship and all the rest of it. I mean, look at how evil our governments are, and they are already MMT governments, you know, so this just proves that MMT is bad. But, you know, like I said, all the other reasons that MMT is bad, I mean, I could probably go on if I'd studied it more, or I remembered more of what I said in my voice recorder notes, which I didn't want to bother transcribing, and it would have taken too much time. I could probably debunk MMT even further, but yeah, just, you know, like, learn more about economics, you know, like, read you know, Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. It's probably the most important nonfiction book you'll ever read. It's super, super, super important. And also, you got to understand the money system. You have to understand the money system. And there's a ton of stuff in Economics in One Lesson that they don't talk about because it's not really a book about sound money. Just like Makers and Takers, also a really good book, but doesn't discuss sound money. So you really got to learn a lot about sound money as well, and one of the ways to do that is to watch all the videos on the Blank P channel, and watch all the videos in the Hidden Series of Money, Hidden Secrets of Money series on the Mike Maloney channel. And there's like 8 to 10 videos, watch them all. They're like little documentaries. They're like, I don't know, maybe half an hour each. Some are 15 minutes, maybe one might be 45 minutes or an hour. But basically, I think they're all about half an hour each, or most of them. So, you know, read Economics in One Lesson, watch the Mike Maloney channel's Hidden Secrets of Money series of videos, and watch all of Blank P's videos, and I think you'll get quite educated on this stuff. And watch Kitco News's, you know, interviews with various people like, you know, Doug Casey and all kinds of people, you know, Jim Rogers, Jim Sinclair, Jim Rickards. Watch a bunch of interviews by these people, and you will get much more knowledgeable about this kind of stuff, and then you can probably start to see how retarded MMT is. It's just absolute retardation. Trust the government. It believes in all these economic fallacies. It doesn't seem to realize the debt-based nature of the dollar, nor the fact that we have the petrodollar. I mean, it's just ignorance on top of ignorance on top of ignorance, and idiocy and naivete on top of idiocy and naivete. That's what MMT is. So hopefully everybody liked this video debunking MMT. Hopefully the subscriber who left a comment asking me for a video on MMT liked this video and found it informative, or at least a little bit. So yeah, hopefully people learned something from this and didn't mind this video. I mean, I know it's kind of long and whatnot, but I guess this was the best I could do. I mean, you know, rants tend to go on and on, but yeah, I guess I repeated myself somewhat, but maybe not too much. Hopefully not too much. This has been Redshift. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button. If you disliked it, hit the thumbs down button. Peace, trucks.